Well, we now are interviewing Senator David Leyonhjelm, who's one of our crossbench senators, and Peter and I have had him on before.
Well, he's one of our favourites because he's the one who tells the Liberals what he really thinks,
Yes.
as opposed to some of the Liberals who don't.
Well, at least we know where you stand. We might not always agree, but at least we know where we stand.
But he's not perfect, so we won't get him off too easily. We're not going to let him off easily tonight. Yeah.
David, one of the things that you're a strong advocate, of course, is guns. And a lot of people that I run into say, look, he seems like a reasonable guy, but I don't get him on guns. Explain your position on guns.
Yeah, it's, well, first of all, it's my sport. So it's an Olympic sport, a Commonwealth Games sport. You know, I've been a gun owner and a gun user my entire life. I'm a farmer's son and I actually own a farm myself. So, you know, they're a tool, they're a sporting implement. And of course, shooters, criminals commit crime. Shooters, just because they own a gun, don't commit crime. The focus of our gun laws in Australia changed in 1996 from focusing on individuals who commit crimes to blaming the gun, basically. And that's my chief complaint, that what we should be doing is keeping guns out of the hands of people who are not safe, and we know largely who they are, and not worrying about what they do once we know that they're safe. So I'm all in favour of a licensing system. I don't believe it makes any difference what kind of gun they have once they're licensed, and we should be quite firm about the conditions of a licence. If you do anything that's violent, that's indicative that you're not safe with the gun or any other implement for that matter that you can do harm with, then you might lose your licence. But there's no point harassing sporting shooters, hunters, collectors, simply because they own guns, and that's what happens. And that's why there's almost 1 million of us in Australia who have licences. That's why we get very, very angry about being picked on, purely because we own guns. The assumption is that somehow or other we are going to lose our marbles, grab a gun and go and do something bad with it.
Well, that does happen. Hang on, that does happen. That does happen.
It does.
So, I mean, let's not kid ourselves.
But mostly it doesn't. And
yeah, that's no answer to the person who's just been shot by some bloke who's got a gun.
Indeed.
Who shouldn't have had a gun.
Yes, indeed, and we should keep them out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. But people can commit crimes and do terrible things with lots of things besides guns. Only guns get singled out, and we saw that in Melbourne with that guy who was out on bail.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we just ask on that? Because
he got chased by the police, they let him go loose, and then he goes and kills 5 people and injures more than 30. Nobody says anything about cars, but if he'd done that with a gun, what would the answer have been? All about gun control. That's what it all would have been.
David, I mean,
that was your tweet.
But there are times, though, you know, when there has to be a sensitivity about this, and that was not the day that you wanted to make a point about guns. It just wasn't, and it unfortunately, I think for you, is that it knocks down the standing that you have on so many issues where people like I agree with you. But it was just a really bad day, and I'd like to hear you say, well, I'm sorry I said that on that day, and it's something to be thought about. But you're not going to, I don't suppose.
I profoundly disagree with you. I was responding to a news article that referred to a rogue car, as if the car was doing the damage, not the driver of the car.
Well, I understand
that is precisely the opportunity where I can point out that inanimate objects do not commit crimes.
This was what your tweet said.
Yeah, but you can say that any day of the week. Well, it's not a great day to do it when a child has just been killed by this bastard, and there's still a whole lot of people in the hospitals in Melbourne. I mean...
Well, what difference does 140 characters make to all of that, Peter? The outrage directed at me was basically, in my opinion, fake outrage. That same outrage was not directed at the perpetrator, nor at the justice system that allowed that perpetrator out to drive that car. If we really wanted to get serious about that situation, I would just be, you know, no more significant than the florist who sold the flowers for people who go and put there in that place. There's 140 characters commenting on the fact that a journalist had referred to a rogue car. It's not an excuse for, you know, this great moral outrage. The great moral outrage was that this guy was even out of jail and driving a car and ending up killing people in Burke Street in
And I think
Melbourne.
everyone would agree with that. David, we need to move on because there's other things we're going to ask. Just one quick thing. Does your position apply to automatic and semi-automatic weapons? Would you have the same view on that?
Well,
'cause that's one of the things that Howard banned, and I must admit I was part of that decision.
yes. Well, semi-automatics, there's no evidence that they jump up and kill people any more than single shots or double barrels or anything like that. I don't think the ban on those in Australia was justified. New Zealand didn't go down that path, and they don't jump up and go around killing people. Semi-automatic guns don't jump up and go around killing people in New Zealand either. Switzerland has more guns per head of population than America does, and its gun crime or gun violence is no higher than Australia's. The Czech Republic has a very high level of gun ownership as well, and it also has concealed carry for defence purposes, for self-defence. You can get a permit to carry a gun just as you can in nearly all the states of America. Their gun crime is no higher than ours. So, the nature of the firearm...
There's something mad about the Americans, that their gun rate is so high.
Yes.
Because when I lived there, I was terrified, and I would never have been a copper or a policeman in the United States, because you wouldn't go to a domestic argument. You'd be terrified.
Yep.
So it's a cultural thing.
Absolutely. In statistical terms, violence versus gun ownership, America is an absolute outlier, not an example. If we want to compare ourselves to other countries, we should compare ourselves to New Zealand or Canada or Switzerland or the Czech Republic, all of which have semi-automatic long arms, or hand pistols too for that matter. None of them have full autos freely available. Most of them actually allow full autos under a permit type system, so you have to be a little more scrutinised. Nothing happens, it doesn't cause any harm.
Well, David, whether people agree or disagree with you, at least they know your position on it now. Now, we don't have a lot of time, so I just want to deal with a couple of these issues about pensions. You support the family home be included in the assets test. How does it work if you're in a city like Sydney and Melbourne, and lesser extent Brisbane, where you're someone, in our age group, the baby boomers, whose home has exacerbated in price, it's increased, not through any fault of ours, but we don't want to move, but that would then knock us out of getting a pension if that was our only source of income. How would that work?
Yeah. It's an equity issue. What we have is people living in multi-million-dollar houses in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, as you know, who are living on pensions who are paid for by people who don't even own a house at all. That's the inequity of it. That's what motivates me. So what do you do about that? I think you allow people free choice. You don't say you have to move, but logically, in many cases, that would be the best thing for them, is to move, sell, buy somewhere cheaper, and live on the equity, live on the difference. But reverse mortgages are also available.
Yes,
in fact, I think the Gillard government regulated them to the point where they're now very palatable. And if you want to liberate the equity in your...
You take about 15%, I think it is.
Yeah, that's right. There is a limit on it. You can't end up with negative equity. A lot of people object to that and they say, I don't want to do that. Why not? Because I want to leave the house to my kids. What they're basically saying is, I want other people to pay for my inheritance, or the inheritance I'm leaving my kids. It's totally unreasonable. It's just absolutely illegitimate. And I don't think we can sustain it. We can't afford to pay pensions to millionaires, and that's essentially what we're doing. They are millionaires. Yeah.
We can't afford it.
Well, I have, but time's going to run out. I want to ask you about your dealings with the government, because it's a critical part of the whole business, really, of what can get through and what doesn't. And I've got the impression, tell me if it's wrong, but you're a bit inclined to say to the government, well, I'll give you this if you give me that. And my problem with that is that whatever the issues are, I would be hoping that issues are dealt with on the merits, not just on the basis that I'm a senator and I want to get something, to show people that I can, push the government around. They're not inclined to do it anyway, but to me, that whole principle about merit of the issue and not being distracted by other possibilities, shall we say, it seems to me to be terribly important, and I'd be hoping that you would take that merits position.
Well, in fact, I do.
Yeah.
I'm probably the most principled senator in the Senate. So I have two rules. One is I'll never vote for an increase in taxes or a reduction in liberty. But not all legislation falls into that category. And the example you're thinking of, I think, is the ABCC bill. So it was a very mixed bag. It contained some seriously coercive elements. They included a reversal of the onus of proof and removal of the right to silence, amongst other things, both of which are fundamental basic freedoms that we take very, very seriously. I looked very hard at whether to try to amend the bill to see whether I could get rid of those two, but the government argued, and I think reasonably, it would have gutted the purpose of the bill. I thought about imposing a sunset clause, and in fact the government did agree to that. But then we had a good hard look at what would that do to the industrial relations environment, and they persuaded me that it wouldn't necessarily be positive overall. But I was still very uncomfortable with supporting it. All the Liberal Party people were saying, well, you've got to, the government went to the election saying this is what we're going to do. In fact, they went to 2 elections saying this is what we're going to do. But, I have to live with my conscience. So what I said to the government was, OK, I want what I'm calling liberty offsets. I want to increase liberty in other areas to compensate for the reduction in liberty that the ABCC brought in. They agreed. We negotiated around a number of options. They agreed to them. And as a consequence, I voted for the ABCC. Now, was it the right decision or not? A little bit will depend on how well those liberty offsets work out. They're still working their way through the system. There's a free speech one, and then there's the ABC and SBS board meetings outside the
that was a good one.
Yeah. So, they were worthwhile, but depends, what impact are they going to have on the organisations and the court reporting suppression orders and so forth. I think it's a legitimate approach to dealing with difficult legislation that offends my principles, but I'd like to find a way to vote for it. I don't think it's ignoring the merits of the bill. In fact, it's dealing with the merits of the bill and finding a way to make it palatable. There is quite a lot of legislation I'll simply say, no, I can't vote for that under any circumstances, and I do. And there's others, such as the reduction in the company tax, where my biggest criticism will be it's not enough. We need to go further. So I won't need any liberty offsets to vote for that. No. But it's only when there's a conflict of those two principles involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's good of you, though, to make that point. And I hate to tell you this, though, but a 6th person died
sadly in that Melbourne
again.
But it was a tragedy. It was an absolute tragedy. Yeah. But the outrage should be directed at the perpetrator, not all this, huffing and puffing over a 140-character tweet. I was making a perfectly legitimate point.
Well, David, thank you. Whether people agree or disagree, everyone knows your view and you're straightforward about it. It'd be nice if everyone else was a bit clearer. We didn't get to the debt ceiling lifting, and no doubt we'll talk to you about that and childcare next time.
All right.
David, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
You.
We'll be back in a minute talking to the Australian of the Year, one of our smartest